The Mobile Workforce Podcast. Industry insights, construction perspective.
Hello and welcome back to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Merrill. Today we sit down with Kathleen Baldwin, who is with CICPAC. And Kathleen shares an interesting guide on leasing and how to track it most appropriately from a tax perspective in your organization. They've got a free downloaded guide that you're able to access at any time, and every year gets updated. And she dives deep into that and the strategies that you can use and weigh into within your organization, how you operate. We highly recommend you check it out, and I believe that you'll really enjoy this conversation. So tune in. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. So can you, to start off, just go over a little bit about what CICPAC is, and also talk about the CICPAC Mobile Workforce Guide and how that applies to our listeners?
Okay. So CICPAC is a national association. CICPAC stands for Construction Industry CPAs and Consultants. Okay. So all of our members are CPA firms, and the firms have an emphasis, expertise, specialization in the construction industry. So a contractor knows if they reach out to a firm that is a member of CICPAC, then that firm is going to understand the many nuances of the construction industry. Their accounting is different. Their tax reporting is different. Things are unique for the construction industry. So you want a CPA that understands your industry. And so that's what CICPAC is. As part of the CICPAC organization, we have thought leadership committees. We have thought leadership for tax services, for assurance services, which are financial statement services, and for advisory services. And those thought leaders, what they do is they have a call and they talk about what are the issues our contractor clients are facing. What are they having difficulty understanding? And one of those items has to do with how to account for travel expenses for their contractors when they're traveling wherever, whether it's in town, out of town, to various job sites. So the committee gets together and says, let's put together a guide for the contractors to be able to use. And that's what they've done. We created this mobile workforce document. It is a pretty robust document. It is 50 pages long.
Wow.
There's a lot of information to cover. Yeah. But this document is housed on our website. So it's free to download, so anyone can go there and download the document. And it really just gives them some good content, provides examples, gives them sample policies, and lets them know what do I need to ask my CPA? What are the types of questions that I need to say for my business? This is how we operate in the field. Right. And then the CPA can help them say, okay, here's the way you need to handle your travel.
Right. Okay. So with that, my assumption is, and I'm sure the listeners are thinking the same thing. So these are guidelines that are going to instruct companies of how to address these challenges or to properly document. I mean, what's the high level?
Yeah. So the high level is we cover what are the issues. How do I record travel expenses so that I have proper financial statement presentation. Also, so that I am maximizing the deductibility of these expenses for tax purposes. Right. So it goes into detail. This document goes into detail on those things. And we'll cover a few of the, broader topics here, and I can reference some of the items we have in here.
Okay, great. So what are some of the best practices that you recommend as it relates to these different parts of tracking and monitoring the expenses?
So first and foremost, you start off with how am I going to record the travel expenses? What I mean by that is, am I going to give everybody a per diem? Mm-hmm. Okay. Or is it going to be direct? You have to bring me your receipts and we track everything that way. Or are you going to get a $200 a month, just a stipend?
Right.
Okay. And depending which of those methods you use in your organization, that determines how you're going to treat it for financial statements, for potential, is it wages for the employees or not? So the document starts off with basically you have two types of, I say, methodologies for your travel expenses for your employees. It's an accountable plan or an unaccountable plan.
Okay.
An unaccountable plan, we'll get that one out the way first. An unaccountable plan is not the most advantageous for the employer or the business. With an unaccountable plan, a risk you can have is if you're the employee and I give you $50 a day per diem for while you're traveling. With an unaccountable plan, as the employer, I have to put that on your W-2, and it becomes taxable to you as taxable income. Okay? Well, you're not going to like that as the employee if you're, traveling a good bit for your work. That's added to your wages. Well, if it's treated as an income, as a payroll item for you, the employee, the employer, now I have to pay payroll taxes
on top.
In any of my other expenses that the annual premium is calculated based on salaries, my total salary expense for the company, like workers' comp insurance, general liability insurance. Well, now that number is inflated as well. And so I'm paying a few extra dollars more in premium for those policies because I have an unaccountable plan.
Okay.
So you get that out the way first. We know, the big takeaway here for all the contractors is I need to make sure I have an accountable plan.
Right.
And then this document will go into what is required to have an accountable plan. And under an accountable plan, I can still utilize those various methods of covering your travel expenses, per diem, monthly stipend, or actual expenses. But it's just a formality of documentation that I have on hand. If the IRS were to come in and audit my books to say, I have an accountable plan, that's why I'm treating things this way.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So what role does technology play in doing this?
Well, the low-hanging fruit on technology for this is going to be an expense reporting system. In the guide, towards the back, there is a nice reference index that provides a list of just popular expense reporting applications. Okay. So when, the listeners on this podcast pull up this document here, they can go to that back appendix there and they can say, okay, here are some options for expense reporting systems. Okay. That allows the contractor to be able to have the expenses documented, the reason for the expenses, like the job number, the location, attach the receipts if necessary in there. So it really captures all your documentation information, and it puts the burden on the employee instead of the person in accounting need to call and say, hey, I need you to send me your receipts so I can update this Excel spreadsheet that I'm using to build out how I'm calculating your expenses. So that's the main way. Other than that, it's really going to be just your references to websites for guidance. Is how technology comes in.
Makes sense. So what are some of the repercussions for companies that run into compliance issues that are not doing this properly?
Yeah, the biggest repercussion, it all comes back to the dollar. It comes back to cost. So, one, you don't want compliance issues with the IRS. So you want to stay in their good graces
with the IRS.
Yes, you want to stay in good graces with them. So, from that standpoint, you want the proper documentation. Make sure you've got an accountable plan in place. The second thing is, just what I mentioned before. If you don't have an accountable plan, then you may have to include this as salaries on your employee's W-2. So your employee, not only are they going to have to pay, income taxes on that, they're not going to be happy. And they're not going to want to travel and get that per diem because now it's going to cost me more in taxes. Or it's going to cost me more because my expense report was $300, and I spent $300 on food, mileage, whatever. Hard cost. Yeah. And you're telling me I'm only going to get $2.25 of it, really, because I've got to pay $75 in taxes. Okay. So
net loss.
So your employee's not going to be happy with you. No. And then the other thing is the company itself, like I mentioned before. Yeah. You're paying employee taxes. You're paying, which covers, FICA, Medicare, unemployment tax, all of those things that the employer covers, as well as potentially increases your general liability and your workers' comp insurance. So
they're based on gross payroll.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's not difficult. It's not time consuming to have an accountable plan. So there's really take the time, one time deal, and analyze your current processes internally for how you're handling it. Talk to your CPA, look at your tax return, see how it's being reflected there. And then you would just maybe need to do an annual checkup on it to make sure there's no need to change the policy that we have in place.
Establishing a powerful payroll tech stack just got easier thanks to Payroll for Construction, the construction-specific payroll service that seamlessly pairs with leading accounting software like Foundation, Sage, QuickBooks, and more. As you run payroll, automatically update your job costing and general ledger with labor data. Then, Payroll for Construction takes care of the payroll processing. Sync Payroll for Construction with your accounting software today.
Yeah, so make a good decision, make it once, and then it should be pretty standard from there.
Then it should just roll forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about, and I know this just from being involved with WorkMax especially, but when you have companies that are either operating in a specific state that has unique guidelines, or maybe they're from one state, but they work in multiple states. So how does this get addressed in your document for multi-state or different state?
Yeah, and it's going to matter on types of jobs.
Okay.
Is this federally funded work versus private ownership, industry type work? It really, and this is where you need to sit down with your CPA and you need to explain to them, I've got folks working in various states. How long? Because what also matters is when it comes to how you record things and how you document things is how long does this job last? Does this job last more than 12 months? And it's not a calendar year, so it doesn't matter if the job starts in November, finishes in February. It's a 12-month. And so are my travelers, out of town for 15 months, or they're only out of town for 3 months on that particular job? So it's not in totality, well, yeah, they're traveling 12 months out the year. It's for that job when they're on that location.
Okay. How
long are they there? And so that's going to dictate some of the company's maybe approach to tracking and capturing this data. Okay. And, it will impact depending on what state you're in, what's metropolitan area, if you're doing the per diem method. What per diem method what's the dollar value for per diem for lodging for that city, for that metropolitan area, or for that state? And again, in the guide, there's reference to the websites where you can just easily go in and say, what is the governmental approved rate for a hotel in Chicago or a hotel in St. Paul, something like that. So that's where the state by state matters. Okay. So your per diem, if you work on jobs, say in Atlanta, Georgia, and Dallas, Texas, when you're in Atlanta, your per diem may be one amount. When you're in Dallas, your per diem may be another amount. Okay. So it varies.
Okay. And companies, now that's a requirement, or?
It depends. Do you want to have, do you want to have an accountable plan? Yes. Do you want to have a proper documentation to support what you're doing? Do you want to be in compliance with the regulations for your mobile workforce? Right. Okay. Policies.
What about,
you can pay whatever you want. Sure. You may not get to deduct it.
Do it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes perfect. So what about updates? Obviously, there are updates that happen. How does that impact?
So, as with anything that involves with government regulation, it is, subject to change based on the passage of bills that year. So it's really something that that's where I say you need to annually evaluate your travel policy and your per diems and what you're doing, because your rates do change. One that everybody's very familiar with is your mileage rate.
Yep.
Sometimes it's 65 cents a mile. Right. Sometimes it's 55 cents a mile. Right. So and then that changes effective January 1. So you do need to stay current. And again, we have the links to the websites here, so you can easily go to the links and say, what's the current rate?
So what has the industry feedback been on how this has helped them? And do you take feedback into account? So next year, when it gets updated, there are adjustments?
Yes. Yeah, so So industry feedback is this document is downloaded a significant amount every year, which is what we want. Yeah. Not only do we want to provide this content for the CICPAC members' construction clients, but we want to provide it for everybody in the construction industry. CICPAC's approach to education is that the more we can educate all contractors, the entire industry, no matter whose clients they are, then the better we are as a whole for the industry. We want all of the contractors to understand the regulations, understand the financial statement impact of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And it makes everyone's life easier. So it's the feedback from industry folks, the contractors, has been phenomenal. They love this document. They downloaded a significant amount. For the CICPAC members, we do evaluate this document every year, and usually in the fall time, go through a process. A couple of members on the Thought Leadership Committee will read this thing from cover to cover and make any updates that need to be made. Okay. Now, another thing about this document that we do, because the rules change or can change or subject to change every year based on tax legislation, sometimes we will include information in here that says, for example, this is the November of 2023 updated document. Okay. And on CICPAC's website is going to be the most recent edition of it. But we'll look at the changes, and maybe it's something like meals and entertainment. That's a common
Sure.
And meals may be 100% deductible, or now they may be 50% deductible. Entertainment may have been deductible at 1 year, and now entertainment expenses are no longer deductible.
Okay.
When we're documenting that in this guide, we will say, and so this is 23, and we'll say, this item phased out on being eligible for a deduction in 21 or 22.
Okay.
And that helps clarify for the contractor that's like, gosh, I always thought you could deduct 100% of your expenses. And then, so it points out to them, no, this was a change.
When it changed, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they don't just assume it's just wrong because it's not the case now.
Right, yeah. So and that really applies to the various items related to a mobile workforce that are deductible. Those are the things where every year when you're meeting with your CPA, hopefully quarterly, at a minimum, mid-year to 3/4 of the year, because you don't want to do tax planning in December.
Right. Too late to change anything.
Exactly. So, have that conversation with them early in the year to, and if you're doing it every quarter, it's easier to keep up. It's easier for the CPA. It's easier for you to make sure you're using the latest guideline numbers. Or something may change in your operation. You may go into another type of jobs that y'all are working on. Maybe you used to do healthcare facilities, and now you're venturing into building schools. And so your geographic region has changed, or how you handle travel for the jobs has changed. So you always want to have those conversations with your CPA. Not only how have the rules changed, but how we're doing business, how has that changed as well? You may now have remote employees, versus it used to be everybody was in one building and they went to job sites. Well, you now may have enough work 3 states over. You've got a team there.
Yep.
So it's going to change on what's allowable and not allowable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what is a practical way for a company to get started with the guide, learn from it, and start implementing those changes?
So I would say, first, know what you're doing, what your organization is, how is your organization handling travel costs for your guys when they're going, men and women when they're out in the field. So understand what you're doing now, and know, does this guy use the per diem process? This guy wants to have a vehicle allowance.
Could be different.
Yeah. So know what your organization's doing. Okay. And as a result of going through this process, you may say organizationally, depending on your size, okay, we've got one process.
We're locking it in.
Yes. Yeah. It makes it easier on everyone. Download the guide, read through it. The great thing about anything that we write for CICPAC, we want to write it in a manner that the contractors who are not doing tax returns, preparing tax returns every day. They're not preparing financial statements every day. Can they understand what that gobbledygoo of IRS code is saying? So we put it in what I call layman's terms.
Yep, sure.
Is how we write this. We also include in here the great thing about this document is we have some frequently asked questions. Okay. And let me give you a couple examples of those.
Great.
So, for example, a frequently asked question is, if I use actual reimbursement, what records should we be kept? Okay. And we go in and explain that. What is the impact if the per diem exceeds the federal per diem rate? And this is where I was saying the federal rate. Okay. So I give you $75 a day for meals, but per diem federal rate is only $60. So what happens if your actual expenses exceed the per diem? So we have quite a bit of FAQs in here, which the contractors will find very helpful. And then we also will, depending on the topic that we're covering, we will give scenarios. Right. You know, in this scenario here, I have an employee with no regular work location who travels to temporary work locations. Okay. A description of what that means. How is it treated? And then we will also give examples on exactly, here's the situation, here's how much meals cost, here's what they actually spent, you know, et cetera. So there's a lot of explanations in here. It's not just all technical verbiage in here.
Establishing a powerful payroll tech stack just got easier thanks to Payroll for Construction, the construction-specific payroll service that seamlessly pairs with leading accounting software like Foundation, Sage, QuickBooks, and more. As you run payroll, automatically update your job costing and general ledger with labor data. Then, Payroll for Construction takes care of the payroll processing. Sync Payroll for Construction with your accounting software today.
Yes, I was thinking that, but I was like, okay, I'm not going to say that again. But yes, so it's, and then also in here, and this is another great thing, is we have some sample policies for the contractor. So all they would need to do is, if they have a travel policy for their organization, is just come in here and, like, for example, Appendix D here is a sample company vehicle usage policy. Oh, nice. So it's written out. You just fill in the blanks with it. If you do have folks using company vehicles, what type of documentation do they need to sign? They need to, you know, provide access to their driving record once a year to make sure that they don't have any reckless drivings, DUIs, anything like that. So there's a lot of good sample policies in here in the back of the document for the contractors to be able to put in place in their organization. Because a lot of time that's hard. It's like, we know how to do, this is how we're handling things. Right. We just don't have it documented. And, you know, sometimes it's hard to start from scratch.
Intimidating.
Yeah. It is. And so we provide these samples in here where, you have a good starting point.
Yeah. Well, and even if it is simple, different admins or people that are actually going to oversee this may feel overwhelmed or not understand the same way that another person could have. So it's nice to narrow it down to kind of the simple use case that everybody can relate to, hopefully.
Yeah. We, and if another thing on this, if any of the listeners are going, hey, Kathleen, the document's great. However, could you cover this aspect of mobile workforce? And that helps us know that.
Build it out for future.
Yeah. Build it out. And because if you have that question, you don't understand that issue, you are not the only contractor in the country that doesn't understand that issue. And so as the CPAs, we may not realize, we may just assume, and assuming is not good, but we may assume that, this captures everything. Yeah. So let us know where there's any holes in it, because we've been putting this document out for probably 4 years now, and it is a very well-received document, and it's a great tool.
Seems like a staple for a lot of companies.
It is.
They're coming back and downloading the updates, right?
Yeah.
What do I need to change? What's different?
Right, right.
Love it. So is there anything else with the guide that we may have missed or that you want to talk about?
Nothing else really on this guide. Going back to what you asked me, where contractors should start. And I said, know what you have in place, read this document, talk with your CPA to make sure that, because you may say, I don't know, do I have an accountable plan or not?
Right.
Or your CPA may assume you have an accountable plan, and you're like,
practice that way.
I'm really, going through the minimum requirements to have an accountable plan here. So I've got 4 bullet plans. A plan is accountable if it meets all of the following criteria. I may only have 3 of these 4 items in place. Okay. And so, oh goodness, let me go ahead. I'm not going to self-report to the IRS that, hey, I haven't been meeting all your guidelines, but let's go ahead and make sure I get everything in place.
Moving forward.
Yeah. And then also the company may decide, like I said before, we're going to change some practices here. We're going to streamline this process. Maybe it's a contractor you've been in business for, 2nd, 3rd generation. You've always been small and local, but now you've expanded. You're much larger. And it was fine to have different methods for travel expenses for different employees. And this may be a good time to say, okay, we're going to switch it up and have consistency with the board. Also, I want to, let the listeners know, not only we have many documents on the website for the contractors. Everything CICPAC does is construction industry specific. So, and as I mentioned before, everything we do is written so that it is a useful tool for the contractors. So, on the website, we also have what we call a year-end tax planning document for contractors. I have a copy here.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So this document is, again, it's pretty long. This one is about 30 pages long. Okay. And it serves as a checklist, but it also helps explain what these different tax-related items are specific for contractors. So it's not everything to prepare a tax return, but it's for the contractors. What are the things you need to take into consideration? Again, this document is updated every year because tax legislation changes every year. And go back to during the pandemic, it may change every 2 or 3 months, which was a nightmare for the contractors to know.
How do you comply?
No. Right. And how do you do tax planning? How do you do proper tax planning when you got that kind of constant change? So this year-end tax planning document is an excellent tool for folks to download. And it's going to cover things like, retirement plan options, employee retention credits, Section 199A, provide some tax tips. And there is, again, it's not just a checklist of the title of that tax code. There's some explanations as to what that means and how it can impact your contractors. Okay. And again, this is something that not everything applies to every contractor.
Right.
And another item this document covers is, should I be an S Corp or should I be a C Corp? Right. So the good thing with this tax planning document, this controller, the CFO, downloads this, reads through it, and then goes, wait a minute, our CPA hasn't mentioned this to us. Right. I believe it may apply to us. Mm-hmm. This could be some type of tax planning strategy that we want to incorporate, and it gives you enough information. You're not a guru, you're not an expert on that topic, but you can at least have a conversation with your CPA. Then, if your CPA, for example, the page I'm on right now is qualified business income. Right. If your CPA goes, oh, that hasn't changed in 25 years, then you need to evaluate and go, wait a minute, do I have the best guy for our organization? Because maybe he's not able to stay current because the changes are happening so quickly. Okay. But anyway, this tax planning document is another excellent tool for the listeners to download, and just to educate them, to give them some general understanding of what are the potential tax opportunities for us as a construction company.
Love it. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back on or somebody back on to go more in depth on that one.
Yes, that'd be great. Okay. We'd love to do that.
Awesome. Well, it has been a lot of fun. I've learned a bunch. I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and experience, and I'm sure our listeners will find it as valuable as I did.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.
Thank you for joining us for the Mobile Workforce Podcast by Foundation Software. To hear more episodes, visit us at workmax.com/Mobile Workforce Podcast, or subscribe to the Mobile Workforce Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. And if you like the show, be sure to leave a 5-star review, share with your colleagues, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mobile Workforce Podcast.